Welcome to the Mexpreneurs Podcast, the podcast about the stories of Mexican tech startup founders who are building world-class, fast-growing companies and having a positive impact at a large scale. My name is Sergio Chavez. I'm a Mexican based in Germany, a tech startup founder, executive, and mentor, and your host. Today we have Pedro Luraschi with us. Pedro is co-founder and chief operations officer of Hal9, a generative AI startup based in Seattle, USA. Hal9 is transforming the way businesses interact with artificial intelligence by enabling companies to create AI coworkers and virtual assistants that can automate tasks, analyze data, and provide insights in real time, all without the need of advanced technical expertise. Since its inception, Hal9 has rapidly expanded its client base across multiple industries, including technology, healthcare, and finance, with a strong presence in both the USA and Latin America. Pedro is originally from Mexico City. With a diverse background in mechatronics, robotics, and philosophy, Pedro has been a maker, educator, and lifelong learner. Over the past decade, he has founded multiple companies focused on emerging technologies, including robotics and AI, and has been a mentor to young entrepreneurs across Mexico. I hope you enjoy. Support for this episode comes from Skyflare, a cybersecurity company with a mission to make e-commerce safe for online shops and which currently protects dozens of Shopify-based businesses through its 360 degrees holistic protection. As an online shop owner, you know that every cent you spend in online advertisement counts, especially in Google AdWords. Therefore, keeping a tight control of your budget and the ROI are essential. Nevertheless, there are bad actors out there who can make those costs explode. Skyflare's Click Fraud Protection solution helps you prevent and resolve those threats. At Mexpreneurs, we had the privilege to have Skyflare's founders in the podcast, including Juan Ocampo, a Mexican tech startup founder, and Skyflare's chief operations officer. Visit skyflare.com/mexpreneurs to learn more and also to get a 10% discount during your first 3 months of your annual subscription. Skyflare is at the moment available in Europe, Mexico, and Canada through the Shopify App Store. Hello, Pedro. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sergio. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Pedro, for joining us today. So please tell us, who is Pedro Luraschi?
Well, I think this is a hard question to answer by myself. I also went to school for philosophy, so that kind of questions always kind of arise that part of me. But I like to define myself with the concept of maker. I'm becoming a little bit skeptical, and I'm being maybe a little bit provocative since the podcast is about entrepreneurship, but I become a little bit skeptical about the mainstream concept of entrepreneurship or being an entrepreneur. And I like the maker concept better, at least for me, because it focuses on building things on the one hand, and on the other, it has a very deep community part that is important to me. I'm really proud of my background in education in parallel of my technical career on engineering and building products with emerging technologies. So yeah, I would say that I'm a maker, a lifelong learner, and an educator.
Maker, lifelong learner, and educator. Those are three fantastic domains. And what you mentioned about maker, I actually find it fascinating what you mentioned about why you prefer maker rather than, let's say, entrepreneur. Could you walk us a little bit more about what do you think is the main difference between maker and entrepreneur, and why exactly do you like maker more than entrepreneur?
I won't get offended if someone calls me an entrepreneur, obviously. And I'm mostly a skeptic about this recent kind of image of the entrepreneur as someone that is only interested in making money fast. And the focus is on building a company that grows super fast and is disruptive and destroys the competition. And we have many images in pop culture of these kind of heroic, almost mythical characters, like the big names like an Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs. They become icons of pattern of building companies. And of course, I recognize their work and the size of the projects that they have built. But what I'm questioning is the image of a company and projects that grow super fast and where the metrics of success are super focused on stock value and revenue and the like. I think the maker concept first focuses on building value. And also the maker movement is very tied to a vision of the future where sustainability and community are very important. So I think building value, on the one hand, this mainstream image of entrepreneurship is mostly focused on economic value, or a very superficial way of understanding economic value. And on the other hand, the maker movement sees value as something tied with the community and with making or building a better future. I'm not saying that all entrepreneurs are understanding entrepreneurship in this superficial way. I'm just saying that when you ask me, how do you define yourself? I prefer to use this term because I think it makes us think on a deeper level on the day-to-day basis. How are we building a better future through our products, our services, the relationships that we have with the ecosystem that are maybe not only focused on competition, but also on cooperation? I really got in love with this image of cooperation from my years in education, where I was fortunate to meet and learn from a lot of kids and young students building projects in a semester, in a course, and assembling small teams. And I think this mainstream image of entrepreneurship that is only focused on competition removes this very important part of building a company that is cooperating even with the companies outside our organization. So I'm really grateful for having those experiences outside the business realm, where I was a professor 15 years. So I was fortunate to learn from a lot of students having patterns in the way they collaborated and created innovative projects, that now when I'm building the company, I can sense when we are falling in these bad or toxic or sometimes non-productive patterns that fall more on the competition side of entrepreneurship. I don't know if this makes sense, Sergio.
Yeah, definitely. It's fascinating. And you mentioned also some of the current icons of entrepreneurship nowadays, like Jeff Bezos, and of course, you being in Seattle, that's it's almost like a goth there. So it's incredible. And what I'm very curious is how exactly did you got exposed to this maker mindset? What was the first time that you got exposed to this whole maker mindset, maker community? How did you got into this maker domain overall?
I think I've had different approaches to the movement. I've been building robots since I was really young. I founded a robotics team when I was in high school, and proudly, Panteras is the oldest team in Latin America participating in the first robotics competitions. And probably that was my first experience a little bit in the entrepreneurship world also, because there are a lot of similar experiences and skills building a robot or participating in these competitions, because you have to assemble a team, you have to collaborate, solve a really hard technical problem, and then you have to go to a competition where stakes are high. And there's this mix of competition and cooperation with a technical problem. That path took me to become a mentor and a professor in parallel of my professional career. And I'm really grateful also for that experience, because obviously we experience failure, but we also experience success. And maybe that's also another part of my skepticism towards this image of entrepreneurship, where the image of success is very focused on exiting the company and having the company in the stock market. And we were fortunate to win one of the most important and the most prestigious awards in that competition on our third year. And it was a key experience in my life, and I'm grateful for having that opportunity. I'm also very grateful for experiencing, I was a high school student. I was young and we had some attention from the press, and we got invited by the president to celebrate the award. And having that experience of success and realizing that success sometimes is not that fulfilling. And when I say success, I also refer to that superficial experience of success that is probably defined by other people, not necessarily by yourself. And that experience has always been guiding my experience as an entrepreneur, of looking at this image of entrepreneurial success as a mirage in a way. Obviously, we aspire to grow in the company and having all these good metrics. I'm not saying that it's good to grow in the opposite direction. I'm just pointing at being aware of defining success in your own terms and with your own metrics. So I think that was my first approach to the maker movement. And then I always kept building teams and building new projects. In college, I was building robots and electric vehicles. And that took me to getting a job at Ford Motor Company in Mexico. I'm from Mexico City, and they have a big R&D center in Cuautitlan. And I got a job there. I was working in the electronics and electric systems engineering of the F-150 program, the big trucks, and they're probably the most important car in the company. I clearly remember one of these one-to-ones meetings with my manager's manager when they were offering me a position. And I was telling him, like, I want to build electric cars. I'm super passionate about this. What needs to happen to join one of these teams working on EVs? And long story short, the plan was like 15 years. I needed to do a lot of stuff before even reaching the team that I wanted to be part of. So I think I realized, and I'm super grateful also for my experience in a big company and learning how a company of thousands of engineers collaborate on finishing a hard technical problem. But I also realized the bureaucracy and the procedures and all the things that slow you down as an innovative person. So I quit that job. I joined the smaller company of a friend where I was able to participate in a lot of meetings, a lot of freedom, proposing new ideas, launching new products. And then 1 year later, I started my first company, which was focused mainly on developing experiences with emerging technologies. We used VR, AR, robotics, drones, robots. And that company was very boutique. We were working with big brands on very weird projects. And that company later became an edtech startup that got funding in Mexico and was focused on making learning experiences with robotics for kids in Mexico and similar markets like Latin America. And that was probably my second approach to the maker movement now as an entrepreneur with a company developing learning experiences, curriculum and an educational app, a robotics kit. So during that period of my life, I was able to work with a lot of schools and teachers and obviously kids, trying to understand what it means to teach skills for the future. And I'm really grateful also for that experience and that part of my life because the technical skills were almost secondary. When we were asking this question, what should we teach these 10-year-olds to make a better future in 15 years when they are grown-ups? Usually the technological part was secondary because we were really aware. And again, this was way before ChatGPT and everything that we are using right now. We were aware that the technology was going to advance super fast, and any technology that we had at that moment was not going to be relevant in the future when these kids were grown up. So we focused on other skills that have more to do with learning to learn, to collaborate, and to identify problems that are relevant in the world or in your community. So yeah, I would say that I had that involvement with the movement first as a student, maybe as a participant, and then as a designer of the experiences of other smaller kids.
And it's fascinating how you are in through those different experiences also now impacting the lives of children, exposing them to all of these new technologies, giving them opportunities. What I wanted to ask you as well, Pedro, is you mentioned that you started building robots at a young age. How did that happen? Who led you into that direction? Was it your own initiative? How did you got into robotics in the first place?
That's a great question. I think since I was a small kid, maybe 4 or 5, all I did with toys was building stuff. And I've always had this feeling towards technology of awe, being super interesting about it, but also fascinated that us as a species, like these evolved monkeys, are able to build this amazing stuff like airplanes and cars, computers, etc. Also in my family, you're going to meet Javier in the second episode of this podcast, but he's older than me. He's mostly focused on computers. He's mostly focused on software, but also in my family, our grandfather was very passionate about aerospace engineering, and he was a amateur ham radio hobbyist. And in my family, there are many engineers and technical people. Our father is an architect. And I think we've always been surrounded by this technical side of industry, if you want to say it that way. And yeah, when I grew up and I was starting to build robots, at that time when I founded that robotics competition team, I got really obsessed with the question of if robots or machines in general could think like us. I started reading science fiction, and that path took me to read science fiction that were written by more technical people. And eventually I was reading technical, mathematicians that were speculating about the future of AI. And that took me into the path of reading Ray Kurzweil and, The Singularity is Near and all those books like in the 2000s. This was way before AI as we know it. And I got really obsessed with that question of what it means to be conscious and if a robot could think like us and participate in our society. And that's why I ended up in philosophy, studying It's funny because I joined the philosophy school thinking about all these problems, and I encountered Plato and the classics and medieval philosophy. And I always read all those authors and thinkers from this perspective of the future of what will happen when robots and machines start thinking like us. And now, like fast forward 2024, with our startup Hal9, we're working with LLMs and state of the art AI. And I'm super happy that when I was young, I was thinking about these problems when everyone else took us as crazy people, because in the 2000s, probably the examples that we were talking about was Kasparov losing against a computer playing chess, the Jeopardy IBM machine. And we had these examples, but people weren't taking this seriously. Even in philosophy school, my professors, when we talked about AI, they didn't really understand the possibilities. And now we have all these questions about things like fake news and robots or machines like Alexa, like being there in our house and talking to us. Things are going to change faster and more abruptly. And I've been fortunate to been thinking about these problems since I was young.
And I also find fascinating the philosophy twist, because I think it's especially for people with a technical background or this affinity to technology, like you were even from your early ages, to go through the technical route and go deeper into technology. But I find fascinating that you also took the philosophical route to try to also understand the other aspect of it, what it means and how these led you into old literature and thinkers. It's incredible. And what I also wanted to ask you, because you also mentioned across your path, and even you mentioned that at the beginning, that you were a lifelong learner and an educator. So it seems that also education has played a key role in your professional career pretty much during the whole time, or you were always having this educational hat in parallel to whatever you were doing. Can you please walk us through that, Pedro?
Yeah, I haven't mentioned my mother. She's also an educator. She had a kindergarten, and she's always been interested in kind of designing experiences or environments for kids to develop to their fullest potential. So I think I've always been immersed in that awareness of how can you take decisions around your life to learn faster or to optimize for learning, I think, since I was a kid. And the way we were educated and raised, I think, was very influenced by that way of thinking of my mother. But I took that path when I was in high school, and I founded this robotics team. And when I got to college to study mechatronics engineering, I got invited to become a mentor of that team. So I think I never took a very conscious decision of, becoming a teacher or a professor. I think it was always in me, not as a conscious decision about being an educator. It was like, do you want to keep helping these kids build better robots and get more excited about STEM? It was a no-brainer for me to kept working with these kids. And then I got invited to teach at the university, at my alma mater, the Universidad Panamericana, to teach other stuff like electronics and machine design. And that's a part of me that I really like, being with younger kids, taking big decisions about their life, choosing what are they going to study later in college, or where they want to work, or what they want to do with their lives. And I think that there's a lot of similarities with building a company and, assembling a team and setting a culture and setting a tone of collaboration between people inside the company. It's very similar when you have a group and you have to set up a challenge and lay down some rules of what are we doing together and what are the metrics that we are pursuing. And also, I'm super interested. I don't know if you've heard of this, but and I don't want to sound super radical. I don't consider myself politically an anarchist, but there's this thought in the anarchist groups that they are very aware that authoritative relationships where people have some authority over other people, the nature of that relationship should be built in a way that eventually that relationship will disappear. And in a way, when you're a teacher and you're educating a kid or a student, obviously you have a relationship of power, but the nature of that relationship is for that person, for that student to grow and to develop skills and eventually stop needing you as a authoritative figure. So the same way as a medical doctor, when a doctor is curing a patient, the nature of that relationship is for the patient to cure and stop needing the doctor. So I've always seen that calling of being an educator also similar to building a company, where sometimes you have to hire someone junior that you need to help and guide through whatever you're building inside the company or whatever you're trying to achieve. But eventually you want that person to outgrow you and develop their own skills. And if they want to build their own projects or have initiative and start working on different things, there should be a way to, have trust and to let them do that.
We will be right back for a conversation with our guest. Support for this episode comes from Partnership Leaders, the leading community of partnership professionals and executives in SaaS and tech with over 1,500 members globally. We're living in the decade of the ecosystem, and every CEO needs to become a partnership leader. Just take a look at the top companies in the world today like Microsoft, Google, and Apple. They have all become platform companies, and partnership executives in IT have been the ones leading these transformations. Partnership Leaders brings these executives together and is building a playbook to enable CEOs and business leaders across industries to transform their organizations into platform companies. If you're a tech startup founder, Partnership Leaders is the place for you to learn how to leverage partnerships to take your business to the next level. I'm a member of PL and co-host of the Germany chapter and have seen firsthand the richness and value of this incredible community. Visit partnershipleaders.com to learn more and to apply to become a member. Make sure to mention in your application that Mexpreneurs refer you so you can receive a special price if your application is accepted. And Pedro, you mentioned also that you started multiple companies already. So you mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, actually Hal9 is your third company. So first, why did you decide to start your own company? You mentioned about all of these different experiences that I completely agree are very much like building a company, like when you were building teams for these robotics competitions and so forth. But at the end of the day, despite having that experience, not everyone goes into starting a company, but you did. So I would be very curious to understand, why did you ultimately decided to build a company? And actually not only one company, but several companies. What led you into that entrepreneurial path or a founder path?
The first company I started a little bit more of 10 years ago in 2014. And I already mentioned that I work at a really big company and then I switched to a smaller company. But those experiences as an employee, I always had this reference of what I experienced building my own team that built electric cars or robots when I was a student. And I couldn't find that maybe freedom, but also speed and innovation being an employee. And I also was very motivated towards, it sounds super cheesy, but I have this urge of making myself useful in a way of collaborating and making the world a better place. And I know it sounds super cheesy, but I have this urgency of doing something that is giving back of everything that I've had. And I don't want to sound like I'm throwing criticism at people that are employees. I'm not saying that. I think there's a path of contributing and making a difference from inside an organization. Obviously, I'm not against that. But just me, my personality, my way of relating with work and with other people, I realized really quickly that my place was at building my own companies, teams, and building my own products and services. And I think it's also a matter of personality. I've known people that love getting into a structure that is already built, and there's a lot of certainty in that structure, and collaborating within those teams is also challenging, no? And it's not for me. That's what I'm saying. So the first company, the official name is Baud Soluciones Tecnológicas, Baud Technological Solutions. And it had this philosophy of helping other companies in Mexico to use new technologies. And that's why we started tinkering with new technologies back in the day, like VR, AR, robotics, etc. And that took us to a path of really approaching companies and saying, like, do you want to build something and no one else wants to build it? And that took us to a path of doing TV commercials and really awesome stuff with new technologies. But I think that path, and maybe I should talk more about the question that you're asking about the current company, Hal9. I think there are two reasons why we ended up building this company. One is that me and Javier, my brother, we always wanted to build something together. He moved here to the US 18 years ago. So all this career that I'm talking about, Javier was in parallel in the US. He left Mexico when I was a teenager, when I was working on these robots in high school. And obviously, we've stayed in touch and we were talking about what we were doing. And I think we always wanted to build something. We actually tried. We launched a failed Indiegogo campaign of an e-ink device. We were super, like we say in Mexico, no, in Spanish, muy verdes, super green. We were immature. But we had that experience and then we never tried it again. Javier went to work to Microsoft Research and Art Studio, and I was building these companies, doing more hardware stuff and edtech products. And I think the pandemic was Obviously, it was hard in a different ways, and we lost people in our family and around us. It's obviously a sad chapter in history, but also I think I'm also grateful for that because it was a shock that allowed us, Javier, to quit his job and found Hal9, this company where we're working on, and also on my end, the educational market was completely disrupted, and it was sad to see most of my customers go bankrupt and stop operating, and new things started to emerge. We started having different kind of customers. I started also working with a customer that we have here in Seattle, so I started traveling here. So kind of our lives changed from the pandemic, and we started to see this opportunity of let's do this together. Javier started before me. I was still working on my companies in Mexico when he started tinkering with a very different product. I shouldn't spend much time talking about it, but we were basically building dev tools for data scientists. And I started, working with him first as an advisor, telling him a little bit about my experiences with the other companies and helping with the fundraising side. And little by little, I started involving myself more until 1 year later, when the company was ready to be incorporated and officially launched, we decided to launch it together and to partner. And I eventually started working full time on Hal9. So to me, I haven't spoken about what we do, but AI, as I was mentioning, was always in my head when my technical background is in the hardware side and designing mechanical systems and circuits and firmware programming. I code in C++, for example. And AI for me was always kind of in the background. I was not building AI with my first two companies. I'm always super excited about exploring this frontier. And to me, philosophically, is probably one of the foundational experiences that humanity will have in our time. So when we started tinkering about AI, I obviously got super drawn to it. And there's also an educational component because any new technology involves some sort of education to customers and a way of decoding technical problems for people out there. People focus on other problems that are not technical. And that translation to me is super exciting. Just helping people understand and become proficient on new technologies, in this case, LLMs and AI. And yeah, that's how we got together and started working on Hal9. And that was 3 years ago in 2021 when we officially launched.
There's a lot to unpack there, Pedro. And I'm really looking forward to our next conversation with Javier, where we're going to dive deeper into your startup. But you mentioned a lot of fascinating things. Also, this last thing that you mentioned about the educational component, when you hear about the digital divide that has happened in previous waves of technology, and AI being the next big thing, no, where another divide may come unless makers like you do something about it to sort of like bring people up to speed and help them as well. But anyways, there's a lot of fascinating topics we could discuss here. But what I would also love to know, Pedro, so you now move to the States to build Hal9 together with Javier. But what's still your connection to Mexico?
Obviously, we have Mexico in our blood. On the one hand, I think having this experience of being an immigrant and moving to the US, I think it's also a part of being Mexican. A lot of people have this experience of coming to the US, work for a few years, some come back, some stay. So I think I'm also understanding a different side of my country now that I'm being outside, ironically, that I couldn't understand when I was in Mexico and I had these conversations with people that left. It's also interesting to find a community of Latinos here in the city and in the country in general that have ties to Mexico. And it's been interesting to find that reflection from my country, from people that were born here, for example, and their families immigrated a few generations before. I'm married to a Mexican girl, so we speak Spanish here in the house. So I think in a way, I'm really happy to keep that connection alive in my personal life. On my work life, part of the team is also in Mexico. We have a great team of people in Mexico City. So we also have that connection. And I've been trying. I miss teaching and I will come back someday, but I have a few entrepreneurs that I mentor that, we have calls over Zoom more or less periodically, and I try to help with whatever I can. And yeah, I think another dimension of your question is that when people ask me, how is it, after moving to the US, I feel like I changed countries, but I also moved from the city to the country. I live in the middle of the forest. I don't really live in the city. So I'm experiencing coming back to nature, and it's a different dimension of just changing countries. What I'm trying to say is that part of what I'm living and the way we are working remotely, maybe that would have been done inside Mexico in a way. But there's a lot of things that are super interesting on the business side, just the work culture and the way the economics works in terms of what is more valuable in the US versus Mexico. Time, for example, here, I have this rule of thumb that in Mexico, time is cheap and things are expensive. And in the US, things are cheap and time is expensive. And I bet it's the same where you live in Germany, that the way economics works for startups is kind of the opposite of what happens in a country like Mexico, where a lot of problems are solved by throwing people at them and trying to avoid making big investments in equipment or, expensive software licenses and the like. And here is the opposite. You want to make people as productive as possible just because of how the economics works. And that's been super interesting because it has forced my brain to think differently and to understand the mechanics of the company in a way that I haven't considered when I was building companies in Mexico.
Pedro, we're unfortunately reaching the end of our conversation, but we always finish with the best advice of our guests for other aspiring founders. And you mentioned that you're currently mentoring multiple entrepreneurs back in Mexico. So from all of that great golden nuggets that you shared with us today and what you have discussed with your mentees, so what would be your best advice for someone who would like to follow a similar path to yours and become an entrepreneur or a maker?
Quite often I get this question, and the first thing that I always say is that any advice on this field of entrepreneurship or innovation or the maker space, I always say that any advice, you should take it as someone who won the lottery is telling you the number of the ticket that they bought. Like any advice, you should be super critical and question whatever people tell you. So whatever I say, people should question it. So I already mentioned it. I always try to point out at why are you trying to build your own company or why are you trying to become an entrepreneur? And I try to make people aware of this image of success and to be aware of what success really means. Because I think a lot of people, mostly young students that want to build their own company, they are drawn towards this mirage of quick success and the Mark Zuckerberg story of in 2 months you're a millionaire and you're traveling in private jets. Maybe that will happen, but that's more on the luck side of things rather than in reality it's a painful path and it's not for everyone. I try to make people aware of it's not that image of you launch your product and you become rich, and if you're doing it for that fantasy, you're probably going to get disappointed and probably have a bad experience. You have to be there for the long haul. And a lot of people say this, people from Y Combinator and the like, you have to be here because you're in love of a problem. You don't want to live in a world where that problem is not solved. Not so finding a deep motivation in meaning within yourself, I think it's super, super important. You have to be really passionate about the journey. I remember a conversation with Javier. Maybe we can talk about this in the next session, but I remember when we started, I told him, this is a 5-year project. We're going to be here for years and we have to be passionate about whatever we're going to do because there's going to be rejection and there's going to be bad moments and we're going to be banging our heads against really hard problems. And you really have to find a deep meaning and a deep calling, a reason that is making you do all this stuff. So I would say that as long as you're enjoying the journey, you're growing as a person, you are really convinced that this is your reason to be in the world, that's the right reason to build a company, not just, we're going to be rich. I'm going to be my own boss. I'm going to be free from being an employee or whatever. Those fantasies lead to a really bad place. So don't do it.
Fantastic. Pedro, thank you very much for sharing these with us. I'm personally very much looking forward to our next conversation with Javier. But in the meantime, again, thank you for the time. Thank you for the fantastic golden nuggets that you shared with us today. And we'll talk pretty soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Sergio. See you next time.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And thanks to you for joining us today. Please remember to subscribe via your favorite podcast app to be notified about new episodes and share with us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Thank you also to the Maxpreneurs team, Valeria Morel, Hector Barragan from Hyper Voltage, Francisco Jaimes, Pamela Elizalde, Katia Cruz, Rocío Marroquín. I am Sergio Chavez. See you next time.